Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Monday, September the 25th. Like we like to do on Mondays, we'll be chatting with our friend Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda. Lots to get into with Bill today, so let's begin. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Reasonably well, Silvio. Reasonably well. We are still waiting and looking carefully outside for the monumental rainstorm that we were supposed to be getting. I was already in my emergency boat in my apartment, ready to float out, but we got. I think I saw three drops this morning. I call these ever-ready storms, or
Yes.
energizer storms. A lot of batteries being sold, but the storm did hit parts of the Atlantic coast, but not here, and I think we've come through it all right.
Well, Bill, I have to tell you that from a baseball perspective, there's a little history in New York this September. The Yankees were just eliminated, and the week before the Mets were eliminated. So it's going to be, you have a lot of passionate fans, baseball fans in New York, as you know, with the Dodgers as
Sure.
well. And there's going to be a lot of I don't know what they're going to do in October. There's no postseason for the Yankee fans or the Mets fans. And I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. It's unusual to think of New York in no postseason baseball, Bill.
Well, that's right. And remember, at one time we had three major league teams. We had the New York Giants, and yes, the so-called Subway Series was a New York phenomenon and a tradition. And one of the most interesting things about that tradition that people don't remember is that when the Dodgers played the Yankees, the Dodgers had the smallest field in the major leagues, Ebbets Field. The Yankees had the largest. So you went from the smallest to the largest. It was a completely different game, absolutely different game. If you were there in person, and you watched the Dodgers and watched the center fielder Duke Snyder, you were practically up against him. You got to know him very
Right,
well
right.
in Yankee Stadium, and I did have the privilege of seeing in my early years Joe DiMaggio play in Yankee Stadium. He was a dot out in center field. You could barely see him.
Right.
Very different game.
Yes.
That's what
And
made baseball exciting.
yes. And one quick baseball question, Bill. You should know the answer to this. I'm sure you do. How far apart, how many miles was Ebbets Field from Yankee Stadium or from the Polo Grounds? It wasn't that far, was it?
Not at all. Yankee Stadium was in the Bronx. The Ebbets Field was in Brooklyn. I don't recall the number of miles, but it couldn't have been more than seven.
Okay.
You could make the trip in a half an hour,
Okay.
and everyone went by subway anyway.
Right. Yeah. Because you have to cross a bridge, I believe, right?
Uh, yeah,
To
the
to go to the
subways
Bronx,
went up.
right?
Yes, you had. Was it the Triborough at that time? I don't know if it
Yeah.
was built yet.
Okay.
Yes, I think it was the Triborough.
Yeah.
I think it's
And
now. I think it's now called Ed Koch Bridge.
yes, I think so. I think so. Well, another quick anniversary, Bill, today, 1789. That's an important year in American history. That was the year that President Washington was inaugurated, 1789. The Bill of Rights were finally ratified by the states, so they became part of the Constitution, the first 10 amendments. A lot of people don't realize that they came separate to the Constitution. They
Oh
came in
yes,
as amendments,
that's right.
and it took, I guess, a few states to ratify that. But the whole thing was complete, I guess, once the Bill of Rights was in the Constitution, Bill.
I live about 5 blocks from the building in which New York ratified the Bill of Rights. It's right here in White Plains, New York, which is a very famous colonial city, actually. And I don't think most people living in White Plains know it's here, but that's where that's where New York State ratified it sent in its ratification.
Wow. Yeah, that's very historic. That's another thing. New York was very much a part of course, the 13 colonies, but a very strong participant in everything, the Constitution
Yes.
and everything else. So there's a lot of history. That's one of the reasons I enjoy going to New York City, because there's a lot of history everywhere you turn, as well as a few wonderful churches. I did get a kick out of that, Bill.
Yes, well, New York is where George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States. There are some wonderful churches in New York, especially Trinity Church down in Lower Manhattan, where Alexander Hamilton is buried, and some others. And there is right nearby is the place where Nathan Hale said, "I'm sorry, I have but one life to give for my country," and was executed. New York has played a tremendous role in American history. That role has diminished over the years, and in fact, I'm
Sure.
going to a meeting in a couple of weeks on just that subject, on the decline of New York. And one of the reasons it was diminished is that the people who ran New York were very little interested in its participation with the rest of the country. There is that problem of New York being very isolated. What is the term that is usually used? I've forgotten, but seems to think it's not part of the country. It's kind of different from the country. It really isn't. It was at one time
Right.
very much a part of the country.
Absolutely. No, of course it was. It was, and for a lot of people who are not from the United States, Bill, they think of New York City as the capital city of the
That's
United
right.
States.
And at one
People
time,
overseas.
At one time, it was the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the New York Naval Shipyard, was the most important Navy yard in the United States, and you could
Wow.
sit on a bench on the East River and see some of the most famous ships built going right past you, especially during World War II. I would go to
Wow.
my grandmother's house. You went over the Manhattan Bridge, you looked down and saw aircraft carriers being built, and it was
Hmm.
just, I mean, we were on the front lines in New York, and sadly, that is all gone.
Well, I think some of the population shift has
Yes,
probably had something to do with that. At one time, you look back in some of these electoral college maps. Uh, when FDR was elected in 1932, I think New York had twice as many electoral votes as Texas, for
oh
example,
yes.
back then.
I think
Uh,
at its peak, I think it had 45 electoral votes.
yes, and today Texas has 40, and New York, I believe, is around 30, I think, or
I,
something,
I don't
something
even.
like. Yeah,
I'm ashamed to say I don't know the number, but
yeah,
New
but it's
York,
not 40. It's not
no,
40. No, it's
New,
less than New York, or less
New
than Texas. I
oh
mean,
yes, New York is today an out migration state.
right?
Many more people are leaving than staying, and for good reason. It has lost so many of the features that made it great, and also it has enormously high income taxes and enormously high costs of living. So
That's right.
people are living, and they're actually finding out that there are other states in the country where real people live. I mean,
That's
they read, they take baths, they eat. I mean, they do real things.
They consume, yeah, in these other
Consume.
countries. That's right. Well, it's just interesting because the top three electoral college numbers today would be California, Texas, and Florida.
That's right.
And I guarantee you that was not the case in 32 when FDR was elected. I bet maybe California, but certainly not Texas and Florida. At the time, Texas was way out, and I assume Florida was just a place people went in the wintertime, Bill.
That's exactly right. Florida was the go-to place for New Yorkers, and I remember just as a little boy, we would get on the East Coast line or the New York Central and go to Florida, and it was like a standard trip. And that was it was seen basically as a place where uh, we had a lot of coconuts and a lot of hotels. And in fact, my first memory as a human being was sitting on the beach in Miami watching American troops do their calisthenics. They had
Wow.
taken over many of the hotels because
Right.
they didn't have enough barracks, and they would train on the beaches.
Yes, interesting. It's fascinating how things change.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some of the current events. Let's begin with President Biden. Two new polls came out. One has him. This is the first one is Washington Post ABC, and this one has President Trump at 51 and President Biden at 42. So a 9-point lead for President Trump. The other one has it at 46, and that's NBC is the other one. So, I sometimes it's hard to take these matchup numbers seriously this far in advance. But what is fascinating about both and where they are very similar, these two polls, is the dissatisfaction with
Yes,
President Biden. Dissatisfaction that I guess people feel every time they pump gasoline, every time they buy food, every time they go out to lunch, or maybe every time they see what's happening on the border. What an absolute mess on the border, Bill.
well, a disgrace and a disgrace to this country and to its history. Make the point is being made now that it could fundamentally change the United States. I mean, just the sheer number of people coming in illegally uh, could 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 flip the electoral vote in many states because you can be sure they are going to states that are going to try to naturalize them as fast as possible. And I don't mean anything against these people. I mean, they're human beings. They deserve to be treated with dignity. But this is just no way to build a country. It really isn't. Here in New York, I mean, they these hypocrites who declared New York a sanctuary city and never considered what that would actually mean if the border was open. Well, we now know what it would mean. We do not have the spaces in New York to place large numbers of people. And the schools basically have been told to fend for themselves, that the
Right.
teachers have not been given any instruction. We do not have the number of Spanish speaking teachers that we need. These kids are going to school and can't understand a word, and the teachers can't understand them, and they're told, do the best you can.
Right.
That's
And Bill, the other thing too is there you have that many people coming in, 5 million, whatever the number is, and do we have enough housing? For
no.
example, here in the North Texas area where I live, North Texas, we have our share of some of these people too, primarily Venezuelans. And what they're finding out is that the more people who come in, the more they drive up the rent, because we're already facing a shortage with all the people moving in from California. Now, the difference is that people moving in from California are generally buying homes.
Yes.
Whereas many of these migrants are renting apartments. But we're finding out that everything is going up like crazy when it comes to rent. Like you say, the schools. And I don't know, it offends me. It offends me as someone who came here as an immigrant with my parents. It offends me because, like, when I hear people call it immigration, this is not immigration.
No, it's not.
It's not immigration. This is anything but immigration. Immigration is what my family went through, where you come in an orderly way, you go through a process, you have to follow a certain number of rules, you come into the country, and then when you come into the country, you're in legally. You don't have to worry about papers or work permits or anything like that. You have them already because you've been accepted legally. But I see some crazy things. I see now the White House is coming out. We'll get back to President Biden in a minute, but I just wanted to bring up work permits. The White House has just approved, I guess, 400,000 work permits. And the Dallas Morning News had an editorial on Sunday basically saying this is the worst thing they can do. All they're going to do is encourage more people to come in and wait for their work permit. I mean, it's just crazy what they're doing, Bill.
It is. And then you wonder, especially if we have a recession, what happens to the American worker who is here legally, watching a foreign worker who is not here legally take his job at a lower wage. And I'm afraid if that happens, there will really be an explosive result.
Right.
But the people in Washington don't seem to care. And I might add that the people who run newspapers don't seem to care. This is a major crisis in the United States. And you can be sure that if the New York Times ran an editorial, they'd blame Texas.
That's right. Well, they are. I guess everybody's blaming Texas. But I think Governor Abbott, in retrospect, he may have pulled off one of the biggest political moves in the history of the country when he started sending people to these locations, because he said, oh, you're a sanctuary city. Well, here, help us out. And what I find amusing is New York City is complaining about 20,000 people. That's how many people they had in Eagle Pass. Last week in Eagle Pass has a population of like 10,000 people, Bill.
That's right. That's right. Well, I don't know. Maybe the theory of the people in Washington is that a lot of the illegals will stay in Texas. They'll find ways of voting and they'll flip the state. And that may happen. Look, that may happen. We may think of it as almost a joke, but it can happen. People have strange ways of showing up on voter rolls. And I know that the mainstream press says, oh, no, the voting system is secure. The heck it is. It's not secure. And also, you're dealing with a situation now involving the border where people can see it on television.
Right.
And you cannot, one of the first rules in politics is you cannot tell people they don't see what they actually see.
Right.
And they're trying to do that. And sadly, the American press is right behind them. The failures of the press during this period in our history are so great that I think if the history was written honestly, they would be considered one of the great villains.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I think Jim Acosta of CNN, I don't really watch him, but I saw this clip, this little, part of his interview, I guess. He was interviewing somebody, I don't remember who. And he kept insisting, Jim Acosta of CNN, kept saying, the border is not open.
Yes, that's what I see.
And I'm sitting there saying, Jim, come on, Jim, you cannot be serious. Let me show you this clip. I mean, it's crazy to say that the border is not open, Bill.
Well, he is a hardline liberal. He was the nemesis of President Trump at news conferences. You could always count on Jim Acosta to take the party line, and he's doing it again. He could be so
Well,
much more if he would just get off that kick. But I saw part of the interview that you're referring to.
oh, okay. Well, the good news about Jim Acosta is that nobody really watches him. I guess that's
Yeah.
that's the best part of it all. But I mean, with a straight face, he says the border is not open, and I just find, look, I mean, the mayor of El Paso, Bill, a Democrat, is sending buses to New York.
That's right.
So it's no longer Governor Abbott. Now the mayor of Eagle Pass is also a Democrat, and he's screaming. And Henry Cuellar, the representative down on the border, he's screaming too, Bill.
Well, there are a lot of Democrats who are finding that they cannot sustain their allegiance to the party under these circumstances. The party is destroying them, and the party doesn't care. I mean, the Democratic Party doesn't care about the people of Texas. The Democratic Party cares about the people who went to Princeton, and are living in Washington in big houses, having government jobs that nobody understands.
Right.
And,
well,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say that I thought the Dallas Morning News in the editorial was pretty clear, saying that this was a bad idea. That all you're going to do is encourage more people to come, because they will come under the expectation that they will overwhelm once again a city, and then the Biden administration will reply by saying, okay, well, let's issue another of these so-called TPS, which is something temporary. And this particular one that they approved applies to people who came, I guess, before August 1st.
Yes.
Well, a lot of people have come since August 1st. What are you going to do with them, Bill?
Well, I don't know, and they don't know, but all they do is keep on lying about it. It's secure, it's under control, and all these bigots out there who don't want them here, immediately that's played. That if you don't want them here, you're a bigot, you don't understand American history. And who's in charge of the border, theoretically? The Vice President of the United States. And she may be the President of the United States before too long. What a frightening thought.
Yes. And she wants to get to the source of, she kept talking about, we got to go to the source of the problem, but I guess she hasn't been down here in a long time. So I don't know what she's doing these days.
Well,
Bill.
Theoretically, the source of the problem is the dictatorships from which these people are coming. But isn't it interesting? Since this problem erupted and these dictatorships start sending their people north, I haven't seen a single television story about the nature of these dictatorships. Not one. I mean, remember the days when movie stars embraced the president of Venezuela as a visionary? What was his name again?
Chavez. Hugo Chavez.
Hugo Chavez. Oh, remember Sean Penn was down there saying greetings from Hollywood. Now that Venezuela has been exposed as a horrible place to live, we don't see them down there anymore, do we?
Well, no. And in fact, another thing that's happening too is that you have some left-wing governments that have come to power through the elections. Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela, of course, that wasn't an election, but still. And a lot of these left-wing governments now depend on remittances coming from the United States. So it's an interesting thing going on. People are coming, and then they send money back. And the money that is going back is actually, it's almost like a social security program.
Yes.
It's keeping a lot of families together. I remember an interesting article that came out in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago, actually. And this reporter goes down to the interior of Mexico in a small town, and he's walking around, seeing the town, and he notices that, most of the houses are older, but then he notices that a few houses are actually painted and quite well, looking really good. And then he asks whoever was with him, I said, and what about that house? That looks really pretty. And the person who was taking him around said, well, they've got family in the north. and then they go to another place. Oh, they've got family in the north. So the
Oh,
families in the north, meaning the United States, are pumping billions of dollars annually into the Mexican economy. Now, in all fairness, these people work for the money. They're not getting it for free. But this money is in a sense supporting the system that they have. Because
yes,
if
that's
this
right.
money was not coming in, these governments would have a lot of problems, a lot of social problems that these dollars from the United States are taking care of. Remember, these are literally cash payments.
That's right.
I mean, because they wire this money, of course, through banks, but it's cash that goes right into somebody's checking account, and it also eventually ends up in the Central Bank of Mexico, the cash. When they deposit it in the bank or they spend it, these dollars end up in the Central Bank of Mexico. So you have to wonder if this is a scam, a scam in the sense that they're encouraging people to come so that they send money back, Bill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a scam in every way. I mean, it is not difficult to close the border. We've done it many times. The border was secure at one time, so we know how to do it. Trump was building his border wall, and it was canceled by Biden. Uh, and Kamala Harris is in charge of the border. I think it is a part of the whole trend in America of decline. It's a country in decline, and you feel it all around you, and it's a terrible tragedy because the world really does depend on America for its defense. The free world, it depends on it for so many other things, and I think that those embassies in Washington, where they write analyses every day of the United States, must be sending back some pretty grim reports.
You
And
would think so. And
yes,
there's nothing worse than watching the decline.
yes, that's right.
I mean, that's the other thing. When you're watching this decline, when you're seeing, what's going on, when you're seeing gasoline prices at 350 or whatever, and you're saying to yourself, just a few years ago we didn't have this problem, and that's because we had a president who understood energy policy. Maybe he had a bad personality. I understand that. Maybe his tweets were bad. I get that. But certainly when it came to the energy policy and to the border policy, he was right on, Bill.
He absolutely was, and he was also right on and not going along with every little trend and every trendy cause that comes along. I mean, this business of global warming. Yes, there is global warming, but there was a letter that was signed a couple of days ago by I think 1,500 scientists from around the world saying there is no crisis. The world is not going to come to an end. The world is not going to collapse. There may be some damage, but the world has gone through climate change before. But that is not a message that the far left wants to hear. The far left wants to impose a crisis because when you have a crisis, as Rahm Emanuel once said, let no crisis go unused. A crisis allows them to do some things. They declare national emergencies, and they can do what they want to do. So they don't care what
Right.
the truth is. That's for sure.
That's right. Now I remember when we were supposed to be cooling down. Remember that? Wasn't that long ago? It was supposed to be global cooling, and
Yes.
then it was
Oh,
supposed to be global warming. And I
yes.
remember books, Bill. Maybe you remember books. I remember the Newsweek cover
Yes.
at one time had global cooling, and then later on they said no, it's global warming now. And I'm sitting there saying, wow, that's a big change in 20 years.
That's
I mean,
right.
that's a lot
They,
of change in 20
they
years.
they predicted what they called the new ice age.
Right. That's right.
And I haven't seen too much ice. Have you seen a lot of ice? I haven't.
No,
No.
not in places. It's not. There's not supposed to be ice. I mean, I see a lot of ice in Iceland and in Alaska. Yeah, they
Yes.
still have a lot of ice up there, but we haven't seen too much here in Texas lately. I'll tell you that. But
Yeah.
it's just crazy. I mean, and then there was that list of all the predictions that have come wrong. I mean, you would think that
Absolutely.
if you make this list had 30 predictions, and all of them were supposed to happen by now. And you would think that if you make 30 predictions and they're wrong, you would think you go back to wherever you came from and say, you know what, our predictions are not coming true. Maybe we need to check the chemicals or whatever we're doing because it's not happening, Bill.
Well, that's right. And not only that, but as a result of this panic, we are imposing on Americans things like electric cars, which are far from perfected, far from perfected, forcing families to spend enormous amounts of money for cars they don't want. Apparently, they're all lying out there on the lots because nobody wants them.
That's right.
Apparently, what I heard a few days ago, and again, I cannot check this, I'm just passing on what was said on a program, that Ford Motor Company loses $60,000 on every electric car that it sells. How do you maintain a corporation like that?
Right. Well, I guess they get subsidies, but that's probably not going to go on forever either.
No.
But the problem, and I can tell you, I mean, Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez can tell you what the problem with electric cars is. She wanted to buy an electric car, but it didn't have the range, I guess, to go from New York to Washington.
Right.
So she decided not to get one, I guess. But that's the problem. I mean, if you live in a metropolitan area like New York, maybe you drive 200 miles a week, if that
Yes.
much. But if you live in Texas, you drive 200 miles easily in a week. I know that. So
Yes.
you're going to be charging your car at least twice a week. And it's very cumbersome when you have to charge it outside of your house. At home, you can just plug it in, of course.
Yeah, but even if you
But
plug it in at home, you notice the one statistic they don't give you is how much will it cost you to charge that car 2 or 3 times a week? That's a lot of electricity.
it is. And if everybody else does it, then, I guess we're going to have to build more power plants to charge all the. A couple of topics, Bill, I wanted to get into, but let me go back for a second to President Biden. What these polls show is tremendous dissatisfaction with him as a leader, as a president. And you have to wonder if maybe some Democrats are not reconsidering his candidacy. I don't know how you can look at this poll. I know it's far in advance and there's plenty of time, but it's not a good poll. I mean, when 37% of the people approve of your presidency, you're getting pretty close to family territory, Bill.
That's absolutely correct. And, I've always said the base of the Democratic Party was 30%. And that it's approaching that, as you said. I think the dissatisfaction is not only with him personally, but the whole political picture in Washington. Neither party gets very high ratings, but of course he's the guy in power, so he's gonna get hit. And just a feeling that the government doesn't really represent us. It doesn't represent our values. It represents small groups of people with a lot of money and a kind of trendy attitude toward life. And I think there's also a feeling among people in the working communities that the Democratic Party has just about abandoned them and has no interest in them. And they are finding a home in the Republican Party, but the Republican Party doesn't know how to reach out to them as well as it should. We can criticize the Democrats all they want. The Democrats should be in a commanding position right now. I'm sorry, the Republicans. The Republicans should be in a commanding position right now, and they're not. And one of the reasons is they really don't know how to go after votes, and they don't know how to win. One Republican said this week that the Republicans are too content with losing, and I think there's a certain amount of truth to that.
Yeah.
They're too gentlemanly. The Republicans can really make enormous gains next year. I don't know if they can make those gains with Donald Trump. We've talked about that before.
Well, and that's my point, that I think you wonder if Donald Trump's name was not on the ballot and it was more of a referendum about Biden, I think these numbers could be bigger.
Oh, yes.
Because, I mean, the reality is that when you put Trump on the ballot, there are just some people who are never going to vote for him for whatever reason.
That's right.
And you have to, I've always been afraid of that because I look at that poll 46-46, and I'm saying to myself, those 46 who are supporting Joe Biden, how much of that is just, I hate Trump?
Yes.
How can you possibly be satisfied with Joe Biden, but yet 46-46, I think a lot of that is Trump, Bill.
I happen to agree with you. He just turns a lot of people off. And when you can think of it a year from today, it's hard to think a year from today because any number of things can happen. I mean, neither of these people could be at the top of their tickets. Right. I think there is clearly a movement underway in the Democratic Party, but people make the point it may be too late. And the party itself is working for Joe Biden. And then on the Republican side, can anyone catch Trump? I don't really think so at this stage.
Not right now. Not right now. I mean, the time isn't there. This is sort of like in a baseball. analogy, he's got like a 10 game lead on Labor Day. I mean, it's kind of tough to lose that.
Yes.
But still, it could happen. It could happen. Bill, a couple of quick things here before we run out of time. You wrote an article about a public school in Maryland, where I don't know how many schools, the kids were not even proficient in math. And then you see numbers like that, and the reaction from the local communities is, okay, so what? They don't know how to do math at whatever level. I mean, there ought to be the governor of that state should fire everybody or should call for everybody on that school board to resign when you have numbers like this. I mean, it's how can you possibly have a school where kids cannot do math, Bill?
Well, the actual figure was that 40% of the schools in Baltimore do not have one student who can do math at a grade level.
Wow.
Not one student. And you're talking about an impending disaster. What happens when these kids grow up? If they do grow up, they also have a very large crime rate. And the attitude among the people is ho-hum.
Right.
Ho-hum. And the reason is that the leadership, and that you have to call out the black leadership on this, they don't seem to care. As long as they take critical race theory and learn to resent everybody, that seems to be pretty much where they are. But without math today, and without an ability to do technical work, without understanding the technological revolution, you're going to be nowhere, and these people are going to be at the bottom again.
That's right. And then you wonder about the leadership. A lot of the leadership doesn't send their kids to that school, and that's the other thing.
That's absolutely right.
You know, a lot of them send their kids to private schools, so they're doing fine. They're doing fine, but it's the kids in these neighborhoods. This is such a bloody thing that, you know, it makes me wonder what the governors of these states are thinking. The governor of Illinois, the governor of Maryland, what are they thinking when they allow stuff like this to happen? You would think that the governor would call out the school board and say, this is ridiculous for you to have results like this. One more thing I wanted to mention, Bill, is right before we went on, we were talking about foreign policy. And you know, what you were saying right before we went on is that foreign policy has a way of creeping up on you. And, you know, the one day you don't realize 9/11 happens or something, or
right.
Pearl Harbor happens. And this is the way it's always been. It comes out of nowhere. And you've got situations like Iran, Ukraine, Russia, and China. Talk a little bit about that. And what you said about Iran, I thought was pretty alarming, Bill.
Well, the other countries are not stopping their foreign policy and their foreign aggression because we have a problem at the border, you know, or because we have an election. The television networks, the news programs tend to concentrate on the horse race and the election. But we are being challenged around the world now. We are being challenged in the Pacific by China with the possibility that if we show weakness, they may really try to take Taiwan. The question is, what do we then do? The discussion isn't even being held. What if Taiwan begins to fall? Do we send troops? I mean, then it's not a war about Taiwan anymore. Then it's a China-America war. Do we send troops to die for Taiwan? What will the American people think? What if we don't do it? What if we don't do it and Taiwan falls? There is no country in Asia that's going to take us seriously. You know, what counts around the world is power and who wins. And what is amazing is how it is off the front pages. We now know that Iran is probably within a few weeks of building an atomic bomb. That doesn't mean they will build it, but they have the purified uranium that they need to build the bomb, and they have that. They also are building intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we don't even mention them. Right. I mean, the discussions about Iran, last week we had an agreement with Iran to get 5 of our citizens back who were hostages in exchange for our releasing something like $6 billion in funds to Iran. What do the people in Washington think Iran is going to do with that money? They're not going to engage in public service. They're not going to teach Hebrew in their schools. They're going to build weapons. And yet the press does not seem terribly interested.
Or they may funnel that money to terrorist organizations.
Yes.
It's not like they don't have any more friends in the terrorist community. I mean, they're still very actively connected to many of these groups. And then you've got, Bill, the Ukraine war that just seems
Yes,
to go on.
goes on and
And I
on.
mean, look, I like to see Ukraine win the war, but I wish we had a better explanation of what's going on. It seems like the only thing we ever talk about, and this is why I think so many people are confused, is the only thing we ever talk about, we're going to send more money. We're going to
Yes.
send more money. We're going to send more money. Okay, fine. I'm not against sending the money, but explain to me, what is the objective? I
Well,
mean,
that's
when
it.
it's,
There doesn't seem to be a real policy. The
well,
policy, if anything, is, well, we won't really let Ukraine lose. Well, how
right,
do we prevent that?
right,
We if we're going to send arms to Ukraine, send the arms they need to win the war, or begin a negotiation and break some heads there in both the not Soviet Union, but Russia and Ukraine, and get some kind of at least a temporary truce to stop the fighting.
right.
We've done that before, but there does not really seem to be a policy. At the same time, while we talk about China, in Western Europe, they talk about Russia.
Mhm.
Russia is becoming a threat again. And you see countries beginning to take that threat seriously. I mean, Germany finally has woken up. Norway has woken up. Sweden is now a member of NATO. I think it is. I don't. Maybe
I think
they
it's
just
Finland. Finland, right? Finland. Yeah.
Finland is the member. Sweden has applied. These are countries you never believed in the past would want to be part of NATO.
No,
Now they realize they're in danger.
that's right. And let's just hope they all pay their share.
Yes,
And that's the
absolutely.
other issue, because it's great to be a part of NATO, but when the check comes around, a lot of countries say, "Well, we'll mail the check next week," and they never do.
That's right.
And you have some problems like that. Let's just hope. But it just seems to be, Bill, more and more when I to sort of wrap it up this week. But when I see the public, the attitudes about President Biden, what I see more and more is a public saying, this guy is not exercising leadership. You can criticize Reagan, or I know they love to criticize George W. Bush, but I thought the guy at least had an idea of what he wanted to do, and he sold it, and he went to the American people. We're not getting any of that with Ukraine, Bill.
No, we're not. And should there be a major crisis which requires our participation, who will make the decisions? There's a growing feeling, whether it's true or not, that Biden is not really in charge of his own administration. That behind the scenes, that the Obama crowd is pulling the strings. It certainly is true in the Middle East. It seems to be true with Iran policy. I mean, at what point do we say to Iran, enough?
Right.
Stop doing what you're doing, or there'll be no future. But
That's right.
they won't do it.
Well, again, they have to fear the person who's telling them that,
Yes, and they don't fear
and
Joe Biden.
they don't fear Joe Biden, and they may fear the United States military. That's true, because we still have tremendous power, but they certainly don't think that the man running the show is going to make the call to use that military. I mean, I don't want to use the military. That's the last thing I want to do.
Right.
But the military is the way you push your weight around. If they know that you will use the military against them, you're going to get them to negotiate a little bit better. I've always felt that way, Bill.
Absolutely. That's a powerful piece, and
That's
it
right.
became a theme, and it works.
That's right. Well, Bill, have a great week. As always, it's a great pleasure to chat with you and to chat with you about these issues. And thank you so much for joining us. And my gosh, we already have a lot to talk about next week.
We will have plenty to talk about, and then week after that.
That's right. It's
Okay.
going to be like that. Thank you so much, Bill, for
My pleasure.
joining us as always. Thank you so much. Well, this is Silvio Canto in Dallas. Another great conversation with our friend Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda. There was a time when you could talk about the United States and the United States being a superpower, and that commanded a certain degree of respect. And I don't know if that's true anymore. When people see what's happening on the border, when people see the weakness that we're projecting from the White House, I don't know. It makes me wonder. Bill brought up the idea that we're a nation in decline. That's what I fear, that we're a nation in decline. Now, it doesn't have to be a permanent decline. I don't want to sound like Governor DeSantis, but I think he does have a point when he says we're a nation in decline. But it's not permanent. We can still turn it around and believe in this great country again. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. Enjoy your Monday. Have a great week and good luck to the Rangers. They've got some big games coming up this week. Bye-bye, everybody.